The most fascinating thing about music is not how it plays upon the conscious mind, but how it plays upon the unconscious mind. When we watch a movie, our conscious mind sees the movie, but our unconscious mind sees the archetypes within the movie, something more symbolic. And it's the same thing with music. It also speaks to the unconscious mind and can lead to all kinds of epiphanies.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between or beyond. Today I'm here with M. Laszlo. Matthew lives as a recluse in Bath, Ohio. Rumor holds that he derived a pseudonym from the character Victor Laszlo in the film Casablanca. He's lived and worked in New York City, East Jerusalem, and several other cities around the world, and he has kept exhaustive journals and idea books corresponding to each location and post. He holds a bachelor's degree in English and an MFA in poetry. M. Laszlo, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Edmund. It's great to be here.
So I'm curious, actually, the first thing I was curious is you've lived and worked in Israel. I also happened to be there for a few years. I was just curious when you were there and what your thoughts were of it.
I was there in the early 1990s, and I was in college at the time. I was just looking through a magazine one day, and I saw that there was going to be an expedition in the summer of 1990, and it was called the Leon Levy Expedition, associated with Harvard and the museum there. So I applied and I volunteered. And after doing that, I just stayed on and I worked in the lab and I worked my way up the hierarchy of the expedition, did different jobs, whether it was in the winter working in the lab or assisting square supervisors and things like that during the summer. And then I would also spend a lot of time in East Jerusalem, where I met a Palestinian guy named Auni Mustafa Tara from Ramallah, very nice guy. And he ran a youth hostel in East Jerusalem in the old city. And so I began night clerking for him. And it was a lot of fun. And it gave me a lot of time to work on my writing, my journals, my idea books. And that's when I really started collecting ideas actually that went into Anastasia's Midnight Song.
Excellent. So I'm curious what your impression of the old city was from a Westerner's perspective, because when I was there, I was actually a little bit shocked considering the historical significance of the city. I was a bit well, I'll let you, maybe you can, if you had any strange impressions, or was it just like, did you just find it normal?
Well, it's unlike any other place in the world. I mean, the old city, the four quarters are very different. The Muslim quarter, you really feel like you're in the Middle East or a Muslim Arab country. The Jewish quarter, I mean, there were a lot of American Jews living there. And it was it was all renovated and reconstructed from following the destruction in the 1948 war and the 1967 war. So it seemed newer to me. And the Armenian quarter seemed very small, very nice, but very small. And I love the Greek quarter. That's where I spent most of my time in the Greek quarter, even though I worked and lived and worked in the Muslim quarter. I just loved Abu Shana Pizzeria, right in the heart, right when you come in through the Jaffa Gate. It's a great pizzeria, and just loved talking to people. There was a great pharmacy there too. I can't remember the name of the pharmacy, but I think there were Palestinian Christians who ran the pharmacy, and they're just very nice people. Oh, I also attended services at the Christ Church, which was right there in the Greek quarter. And it was a fascinating service because it was all in Hebrew, and it was given by Israeli Jews who had converted to Christianity. And I loved it. I mean, I felt like I belonged there. So I think I fit in.
Yeah, it's a very vibrant place, isn't it? Also,
Yeah.
it is quite multicultural. I think most people sort of don't really, well, multicultural in that people come from a lot of different origins to
Yes.
Israel, don't they?
Right. And you see that too on the Mount of Olives. I mean, the monasteries, the Russian Orthodox monastery up there. I mean, there's just so many different cultures represented. And I loved that about it.
Yeah, for me, what was interesting with the old cities specifically, and this probably speaks to some naivety that I had, but given its historical significance, when I first visited Jerusalem, I kind of expected it to be all sort of cordoned off and like you'd have to pay to go in to see all the and it's a completely lived city and it
Right.
surprised me to be honest. I had expected again a historical sort of city to be, carefully managed and everything.
I know what you mean, but there are times I had really great spiritual interludes despite all of that. I mean, for example, at night in the winter, I would listen when I was night clerking in the Muslim quarter, I would listen to the cats howling and caterwauling because they were so cold, and whenever they would be running around the rooftops, and I could hear the bells from St. James Cathedral in the Armenian Quarter. I could hear them pealing, and that sound would commingle with the sound of the caterwauling. And then closer to dawn, I would hear the muezzin chanting, calling the Muslims to prayer. And those sounds, oh, and that's just the sound of the winter wind blowing through the rooftops. I just thought that was really beautiful. And then also one winter we had a heavy snow, and I walked out of that youth hostel where I worked, and I was greeted by a hummingbird. And I followed the hummingbird through the virgin snow, and it led me up to the Temple Mount, or what religious Jews call the Temple Mount. And so I got up there towards the Dome of the Rock in the and Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I was all alone. It was just the hummingbird and I. And eventually the hummingbird flew off. I don't know what happened to it, but it was just, for me, it was almost magical. And I want to believe that the hummingbird didn't just fly off, but it flew up into heaven or something like that. I mean, because it just disappeared on me. So, I mean, yeah, it's a modern city and it's got everything, all the issues that you would expect, noise pollution and conflict, geopolitical conflict, all that kind of thing, and garbage piling up on days when, the unions are striking. But at the same time, every now and then you'll have this really beautiful, magical, spiritual interlude, like with the hummingbird, or just listening in the night on a winter night, just listening to the sounds of the old city. I thought it was unlike any other place in the world.
Yeah, it can be quite a magical place, can it?
I
It's
think so.
I suppose it's not surprising that so many people fight over it. I guess.
Right. And it's tragic. I mean, I my mother died about a year ago, and afterward I joined the Catholic Church because she was a cradle Catholic, and I just wanted to be closer to her. And every time we go to Mass, we will pray for world peace. We'll talk about the Middle East and pray for peace. And afterward, everyone in the parish will say, Lord, hear our prayer. We'll say that in unison. And we say it like we mean it because we do mean it. I'm not really a very political person. I'm neither a progressive nor anything. I'm nor any kind of like a political partisan, but I do cringe at just how, I mean, I cringe at the fact that we do live in such a war-torn world, it's such a stressful and pernicious world. I wish it were not so, but there's nothing we can do. I mean, the only thing I can do, I think, is just pray, and that's what I do. I'm very spiritual in that regard.
So I guess moving from real wars to fictionalized real wars, your pen name you've taken from a character in Casablanca. Now I have to admit, I've never actually seen the whole movie all the way through. But why particularly this character did you choose?
Well, when I was growing up, my father was a physician, and he had a patient who was a professional gambler, and he didn't like to give his real name whenever he went to the hospital. So when he did go to the hospital, if there was a long line at the emergency room, he would pretend to faint so that he could go to the front of the line. And then after he spoke to the doctor in the emergency room, he would give his name as Victor Laszlo. He always gave that name because he did not want to give his real name. So later on in life, when I had to choose either my real name or a pen name, the first thing I thought of was Victor Laszlo. And then I just kind of mixed it with my own name and kept, instead of Victor, I put in the M for Matthew. That's how it came about. And I use that too at my Catholic church because I don't know, I like to meet people who will read my book and give me reviews on my product page. So I just thought it would be easier if I gave my pen name as my name. And so I use that there too.
Are you a fan of classic films at all, or is it literally just came about this way?
I am a fan of classic film. I love old movies. And I do watch a lot of Turner Classic Movies. And my aunt has a lot of DVDs, and we watch old, old time movies. I don't know. I really like anything, old movies. I like new Hollywood era movies, the 1970s, cinema of the 70s. That's great stuff too. Like Chinatown. That's a great movie. Barry Lyndon is a great movie, I think. But yeah, I'll pretty much watch anything from either the classic studio era or the new Hollywood era.
So I'm curious then, do you think Hollywood has sort of fallen down in the modern times, or do you just think maybe there's a lot more stuff we have to filter through to get to the good stuff nowadays?
I think the former rather than the latter.
Okay.
I think the quality has gone way down. In the early 80s, a lot of lefty elites from Harvard started taking over Hollywood. They weren't the same as the people from the film schools, the really creative people. People like George Lucas and Spielberg, they were brilliant, and Martin Scorsese. And they made great decisions and they made great movies because they were from film schools. But it seems to me that in the Reagan 80s, the Ivy League elite took over Hollywood, and they don't really necessarily know as much about cinema and storytelling. And they're just not as funny. And also, when I watch classic film, I love the black and white cinematography. And when I watch new Hollywood era films, I love the motion picture cinematography there, like in a beautiful film like Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick. It's just so beautiful. But I don't think movies look like that anymore because they're not really made on cameras anymore. I think in Hollywood they make the films on computers, and it just doesn't look right. To me, it just doesn't look right.
Yeah, it's a lot of them seem to be made by committee now, and
Yeah,
that's kind of destroying the creativity, I suppose, isn't it?
right. And there's just so many computer graphics now, like in all the science fiction films and the Marvel films. There's just too much CGI, and it looks right, but it doesn't feel right. It just, I don't know. I think I like the kitschy, schlocky kind of special effects of the 60s, for example, like
So the
Star Trek, the original.
or the claymation stuff, or the like say Star
Right.
Trek, Star Wars, early stuff.
Yeah, anything like that. I love it. The kitschier it is, the better. But today, we don't really have that. We just don't have the same sense of humor that we once had.
Yeah, a little bit of the humanity seems to be missing from it in some cases.
I think so, yeah.
So what was your path to writing then, now that we're on to storytelling?
Well, I think I've always pretty much been a natural born writer. Because, I mean, when I was very young, maybe like 10 or 11 years old, we went away one summer to Maine and we rented Robert Lowell's house. Robert Lowell was a famous American poet. When I got there, I felt a little bit lost for the first few days. There was so much to do, but it wasn't really fulfilling me. Then I realized that the way to be fulfilled is to keep a journal or an idea book and reflect on the things I'm learning about this new environment. That's when vacation started to have meaning. So the first thing I really ever wrote, it wasn't very good, but it was basically a diary of my vacation in Maine. We were in a little town called Castine, and Mary McCarthy lived there at the time. And as I say, we lived in Robert Lowell's house. I discovered early on that when I travel, if I keep an idea book or journal, everything becomes fun. Everything means something because no matter what I experience, I know that later on I'll be writing about it. And so it just continued from there. I just built up piles and piles of these notebooks.
So, well, I'm curious then, are you a full-time writer right now then, or do you still have a day job?
I'm full time now. I did get a library science degree and I worked as an archivist for a few years, but I just couldn't concentrate because every day I'd be taking notes and writing notes for later on that night when I would be writing, and I couldn't concentrate on the work. So eventually I retired early. And the first thing I did was I went back. I was working in upstate New York at the time. And I went back to Ohio and I found and collected all of my old notebooks and journals and idea books. And I just started typing them up in the computer so that they would be searchable by keywords and things like that. And it took years and years to do it. But once I had them all in my computer, then from there, I started mixing and matching entries to form narrative arcs of all the different works that eventually I came to either write or would like to write in the future. So I just had to do it. I just had to do it.
Yeah. I mean, who would have thought an author being surrounded by books all day would get distracted, right?
Right. Well, I was surrounded by papers. I was an archivist, so I was
Okay.
surrounded by unpublished papers everywhere, but a lot of books too.
So now that you are writing most of your days, I assume from the structure of Anastasia's Midnight Song, which we'll be talking about, that you do. I was going to ask you if you're a pantser or a plotter, but I'm guessing that you plot out fairly significantly because you incorporate a lot of symbolism and various themes in your stories.
I do plot out best that I can, but the problem is that my point of view characters tend to be so cerebral and so brooding that editors will read my work and say, well, there's not enough plot. It's just character driven and so much of it doesn't need to be there. So I consider it to be very meticulously plotted, but the editor doesn't always agree.
They are difficult to characterize, and I guess that's where I get to my next question, which is you've mentioned in some of the promo material for your book that you categorize it as weird fiction. Just wonder if you could, I haven't really been introduced to that as a genre itself. I wonder if you just sort of walk us through what that means.
To me, it means cross genre or trans genre. I mean, a weird story is a story that employs disparate elements from different genres. That's how I use it, but it's used in many different ways. I don't think my definition is the official definition. I just like to call it weird fiction because it's historical, it's psychological drama, it's magical realism, it's fantasy, sometimes even steampunk. We'll go into it. That's what I like. I like a story that doesn't behave the way it's supposed to, or doesn't just embody the requirements of any specific genre, but takes you places that you weren't expecting. I think it's similar to free association poetry. I like the fact that when you read my stuff, it takes you anywhere and everywhere. There really aren't any rules.
Would you characterize it at all as metaphysical, or is that sort of in the wrong direction?
I do use that term, visionary and metaphysical, because I am a pretty philosophical person and I want to put my philosophy into the writing. My point of view characters are always brooding about something like that, meditating on things like that. In Anastasia herself is constantly philosophizing about good and evil and the difference between good and evil. And Jack is constantly philosophizing about coming of age itself and youthful depression, clinical depression, how teenagers rise above those kinds of hormonal imbalances and problems that they sometimes face. So there's quite a bit of philosophical or metaphysical content in the work, in any one of my works. I mean, so it's not for people who are looking for an easy beach read or a lot of sex and violence. I don't write that.
So when you started writing, did you start writing with the intent that, I'm going to publish? Because a lot of authors will start writing and not really think about publishing till sort of the story gets finished. But there are those writers who will start like, okay, I intend to be published. Is that sort of how you started writing, with the intent to be published?
I suppose so, yeah. I mean, I always thought that, well, I have something to say. I have my own thoughts on the origins of the universe, the geopolitical conflict. So why not? I mean, I have something to say, and I always kind of felt perhaps a bit quixotically. I always felt that things will pay off, and I will publish one day, and I will get a following someday. Still haven't gotten much of a following. I'm still very obscure, but I hope to change that in the coming few years.
Yeah, that's the trick, isn't it? For authors, yeah. So Anastasia's Midnight Song is published, at least the paperback version is published by Alkira Publishing.
Right, that's a small hybrid publisher in Australia. It's a step above from self-publishing, but it's still not considered a full-fledged indie press. It's a hybrid. It's a little bit between indie press and self-publishing. But that hybrid model works for me. I mean, because the publisher, Talia, really puts a lot of pressure on me. She makes me work with a professional editor and a professional proofreader. And there's a lot of quality control there that you just wouldn't have if it were self-published.
So the ebook is listed as being published under your own name. Do they just publish the paperback books, or how did that work then?
Well, for this ebook, I went with a different publicity firm. I can't even remember their name, but they had me publish the ebook under my own name. And I think they did that because there were issues surrounding the way that I had initially published the ebook through Kindle. So we had to sort of skate around that issue, but it was just more of an experimental thing. I wanted to see if I could find more readers with that other publicity firm. And they have found me a lot of readers, so I'm grateful. But I just don't know how I'll be publishing the ebooks in the future. I don't really have any preconceived notions. I'm trying different things because I just want to find readers at this point.
Yeah, so I guess that sort of speaks to my next question, which was how have you found the post-publication process, the marketing? How has Alkira Publishing been for that, and how have you found it in general?
They do what they can, but I don't think that there's very much they can do. I do a lot of online book review tours, and I work with a publicity firm in London, Literally PR. They're very good, and they help me do a lot of online book review tours and read-alongs. We do that mainly through my Instagram page. So I can't complain, but I just think that I haven't found the right formula yet for really finding a large number of readers. I might end up doing more Amazon ads in the future. I'm just not sure at this point.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? And you're in let's say, more unusual categories as well, which makes it challenging.
Yeah, I can do well in certain categories. It's just that they're very obscure categories that don't necessarily translate to bestsellers.
Right. So we are speaking of Anastasia's Midnight Song today, your latest book, I believe. You have one published before that, On the Threshold.
Right. And then there was another one. The first that I worked with a hybrid out of, I guess it was Berkeley, California, and they did a collection of novellas, but that one went nowhere. So hopefully someday I'll rewrite that book. I was thinking of maybe even rewriting it as a collection of graphic novels, but I'd have to work with an artist to do that. But and On the Threshold, that one was, I mean, that too, I think I probably will want to rewrite that and put out a second edition someday. It's just because, again, the plotting is lost in that one. There is a clear plot, but it's lost because the characters are just so cerebral and so lost in thought all the time that I think it's easy to get lost in that one.
Right.
So
that one is sort of the one where you discuss your thoughts on the universe and things like that.
right. And the funny thing about that is that I wrote it before joining the Catholic Church. And now that I'm joined the Catholic Church, I have to say the worldview presented in On the Threshold is very different from the one presented by the Catholic Church and the Nicene Creed. But I still want to rewrite it and put it out because it's the character has a right to believe what he believes. So I don't think it will be offensive to anyone.
It almost feels like you're setting up for at least a two-part series there, where you have the original view and then something relating to maybe your new perspective or something.
Well, I will eventually write something about my new perspective. that's in the works for sure. But when I do the second edition of On the Threshold, I think it'll just be true to that character and his worldview. It's just that I'll hammer away at the plot more so that it's not so amorphous and character driven. That's the only change.
Well, it sounds like with On the Threshold, you were challenging ideas that were big ideas out there. And now with Anastasia's Midnight Song, you sort of delve into the mind, as it were. I was wondering if maybe you can give us a brief summary of the story, Anastasia's Midnight Song, and then we can sort of move on from there.
Well, I would describe it, once I just describe it as boy meets girl. I mean, it's just a young woman has come to live in the Sinai Peninsula in the World War I era. She's come there because she feels that by working there, she can free herself from a spirit that dwells inside her, or it's really more of a kind of she imagines that there's a spirit living inside her, but she still feels that she has to do something in order to justify her ability to believe in the idea that it has been exorcised from her. So she comes to Sinai to work in a mirror manufactory because she feels that if she invents or fashions a certain kind of ancient mirror, she can will the imagined spirit inside her into the mirror and she'll capture it there. And then she will be able to get over her youthful sorrows. And while she's there, of course, there's a young man who notices her, and that's Jack from England. Anastasia comes from Russia, but she has a French name because she's really descended from a family of Huguenots. I was inspired by the story of the House of Fabergé in that regard. But anyways, Jack is from England, and he's come to Sinai to avoid conscription in the Great War. He's a very lonely and depressed youth, and he enters into what I would call an illusory love relationship with Anastasia. She will walk through the Egyptian village where they live, and he'll invent reasons why she's doing so, or he'll misinterpret everything she does as a kind of a portent or a sign meant for him. So he's really a student, a young person who undergoes what might be called a case of temporary insanity. I mean, he becomes almost schizophrenic. I mean, he just does not understand her and does not can't really handle reality. He's too lonely to do so. And so the book is really about the interplay between these two characters and how they inspirit one another with different ideas and forms of stress and suffering. It's a bleak book in many ways, but it's hopeful too. I mean, and I'd like to think it's kind of funny in places.
So I was curious why you picked characters with the backgrounds you did. So you have, as you mentioned, the young British guy kind of fleeing conscription, and then the French woman fleeing Russia, and they both meet up in the Middle East in Sinai. Now, with the symbolism that you incorporate into your stories, so what was the symbolism behind that? Because you do also mention several times, kind of a little bit on throwaway almost, but you touch on colonialism and the theft of artifacts from the Middle East, for example.
Right. Well, I think that the reason why I wrote it that way is because I was living in East Jerusalem at the time. I was night clerking at the youth hostel, and I was constantly experiencing different kinds of people from different parts of the world and constantly confronted by issues pertaining to archaeology because I had worked in that field, right, through Harvard Semitic Museum. So many of the characters and themes in Anastasia reflect how cosmopolitan and international the old city of Jerusalem is. I think that's probably why. Everyone I met was from someplace different. I mean, some totally different country and or walk of life. And that's why the book is such a hodgepodge of different cultures and backgrounds. I think that there was no avoiding it, given the environment that I was living in at the time, working in at the time.
All right. Is there a reason you said it in World War One specifically?
Honestly, the reason why is because when it comes to the late 19th century, early 20th century, I just love that level of engineering. I love the way clothes looked, the way technology looked, the way gramophones looked. That's why I set so many of my stories in the late 19th century and early 20th century. I think it's just because I love the way the state of the art technology looked at that time. Today, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look modern. It looks kind of charming and peculiar, but I'm fascinated by that. And when I was growing up in the 1980s, do you remember Thomas Dolby? He was a musician, British musician, did a synth pop, and he was the same way. In interviews, he would talk about how he was fascinated by the way technology that once looked modern now looks so very old-fashioned. And he was fascinated by that era too, the World War One era, late 19th century, early 20th century. And I've always had the same fascination. It's just an aesthetic choice. By putting my characters in that era, I can describe the environment, the room, the furniture. I can give my characters a pleasing world in which to move around because that's the world that I like. That's the kind of technology that I like. So in Anastasia and in almost everything I write, you'll find a gramophone because I love gramophones. Everybody is always listening to a gramophone or a phonograph, a Thomas Edison phonograph. I just love the way they look.
So it sounds like you are more or less producing the movie in your head then of the kind of thing you'd like to see.
Maybe, but I would just say that for me, when I write, I stick to the plot, but once I get into a scene, I dramatize the scene the best that I can. I try to immerse the reader in what the point of view character is experiencing. So, what he's seeing, touching, tasting, hearing, smelling. I'm very visual in that regard. I want the reader to move through different scenes that are discernible scenes, discernible in space and time, highly specific places where the characters go. In Anastasia, Jack ends up living in an abandoned opera house. And I meticulously describe the opera house, even the dressing room where he sleeps. I populate the settings with the kinds of things that would have existed back then. And when it comes to the British military garrison, the Citadel, I populated with weapon systems that were correct for the time. And I really try to describe what he's seeing. I think I got that too from Ray Bradbury. He wrote a book called Something Wicked This Way Comes. And every chapter is a discernible and highly visual scene. And I think he did that because he knew that eventually it would be a movie and that he or someone else might want to adapt it for cinema and turn it into a screenplay. So that's why he wrote it that way. But the Ray Bradbury influence on me is just it's not as if I'm thinking that someone will make one of these things into a movie someday. It's just that I love the way he wrote Something Wicked This Way Comes. I love the visual, and I love the fact that every chapter is a discernible scene in space and time. And that's what I love. So that's what I write. I just kind of mimic his style in some respects. But you see, when you have cerebral characters rooted to a specific space and time, that can oftentimes give a sense that, or actually work against the plotting, because I just go so slowly through what the character is thinking and experiencing that some editors and some readers feel like the plot just isn't moving fast enough. Ray Bradbury didn't have that problem because in Something Wicked This Way Comes, every discernible scene is only like maybe 3 or 4 pages, whereas with my writing, it's everything is like 10 to 15 pages per chapter. So that might be one big difference, or why his stuff goes so quickly and my stuff, it feels more ponderous. Like you really have to think, you have to really trudge through each chapter.
I was just thinking, in addition to, I mean, definitely the smells, which aren't super common to have descriptions, but you also feature music. So obviously sound, but music in this story. I mean, right from the title. So what was the significance of the music?
Well, when I was young, very young, I was always fascinated by the glass harmonica, which was invented by Benjamin Franklin. He loved to listen to musicians who would play music by just spinning their fingertips around the rims of like lead crystal wine glasses and goblets. But Benjamin Franklin thought that there was a better way to make that kind of sound. And so he designed a series of glass bowls, which he put horizontally on a rod that could spin around and around. And then ultimately he could play. Well, there was a water trough underneath the rod. So the bowls were constantly, as they were spinning, they were constantly getting wet and re-wetted. And then with his hands, he could play on the sides of the glass bowls and almost play as if it were a piano or an organ or something like that. Mozart composed for that musical instrument, as several others did too. And it was quite popular for a time, at least, maybe in the late 18th century, the 1780s, maybe. But I was always fascinated by that musical instrument. So I just put it in the book. I had to give Jack some kind of a musical instrument, and that just seemed like the one to give him. Also, it is a very ethereal sound, a haunting sound. Whether you're listening to a glass harmonica or listening to the sound made by just tracing your fingertip over the rim of a wine glass, it is a really remarkable ethereal sound. Later in the book, there's a character named Dorian Moonfleet, and I let her have a stringed instrument because the harp is the other really ethereal instrument. And then in the nursing home where Jack meets Dorian, I have the physicians have dangled aeolian harps all throughout the hallway so that the wind moves through these harps and plucks the strings. And so you're always hearing this kind of very soft, ethereal harp music. And, but I think it was important to have music like that in the book because it is a dreamlike story, and the two characters do, in their own ways, live in a world of dreams, each in his or her own world of dreams. And Anastasia is haunted by dreams and she doesn't understand if those are really dreams or if those are memories or repressed memories coming to her as dreams. She doesn't understand. And Jack is the same way. He's lost in a dream. He's so caught up in his own illusions and his own fantasies that his dream life and his fantasy life and reality become completely intertwined, and he can't tell the difference between them.
Something I've become interested in over the last several years is kind of the relationship between music and consciousness and mind, and maybe as I kind of almost think of it as a liaison between the foundational structure of the universe and consciousness in a way. I just think like with various cultures, okay, each culture has its own preferences, but we can kind of agree on what's really great, inspiring music and what is discordant and painful. And that seems to me to speak to something deeper than we usually think. I wonder do you think there's anything in that, or am I completely crazy?
I think that for me, the most fascinating thing about music is not how it plays upon the conscious mind, but how it plays upon the unconscious mind. And I think the same thing with cinema, literature, art. Like, for example, when we watch a movie, this is something that I learned from the German critic Walter Benjamin, who was a pretty big influence on Carl Jung. When we watch a movie, the movie that our conscious mind sees and our unconscious mind sees are two different movies. Our conscious mind sees the movie, but our unconscious mind sees more the archetypes within the movie. So, for example, the Billy Wilder movie, The Apartment, it's a movie about people working a skyscraper. And C.C. Baxter, the Jack Lemmon character, he's in love with Frank Kubelik, the Shirley MacLaine character. And ultimately, they leave the skyscraper because they fall in love and they realize that they have to get away from the decadent people working in that particular building. But so the conscious mind sees the movie for what it is, but the unconscious mind can see something so much more primal or symbolic. For example, as I was watching the movie one night on TCM, I thought to myself, the unconscious mind can probably see the story of Abraham and Sarah in all of this. because in the Bible, Abraham rejects the Tower of Babel. He rejects the skyscraper, and the woman he loves, they leave that decadent world and they go off on their own spiritual journey. So, I mean, the movie we see consciously and unconsciously, it's different. And it's the same thing with music, I think. Music speaks to the conscious mind, but it also speaks to the unconscious mind and can lead to all kinds of epiphanies, especially, I think, symphonic music. It creates pictures in your mind, but those pictures are also not just guided by the music, but they're simultaneously guided by the unconscious mind itself. So, yes, I do think there's a big connection between literature, art, and music on the one hand, and the mind on the other hand. It's just that the mind is far more complicated than we realize because of how labyrinthine and how deep the unconscious mind is.
So it basically sounds like the great art then is tapping into sort of some fundamental, well, archetypal understanding, I suppose. Whereas like we said earlier, the modern Hollywood stuff is probably completely unaware of that.
Right, I think so. I mean, it's a shame that it has to be that way, but the great filmmakers and the great writers and artists, they love myth and archetype, and they want it in their stories, and they want the unconscious mind to react to it. That's the feeling I get, particularly from like just classic German cinema, like F.W. Murnau and Fritz Lang, those kind of filmmakers. They were keenly aware of myth and archetype and psychology, and they wanted their movies to be interactive. They wanted their movies to really resonate with people on a deep psychological level. You just don't really see that now as much. At least I don't think so.
So one of the other big themes in Anastasia's Midnight Song is to do with mental health. Both characters do suffer mental health issues throughout. And actually, I was a bit confused for a while as to what exactly was going on until I reread the promo and saw you mention schizophrenia. And then it sort of all clicked in. Okay, now I think I understand what's going on. So I guess first thing is schizophrenia. Some people still consider it to be, or some people still believe it's the split personality, but it's actually a kind of sometimes paranoid lack of understanding of what reality is or a misunderstanding of
Right.
reality. So what happens with these characters, without going into spoilers, is at times it becomes so pervasive because it's written from their perspectives that for me, I actually had trouble figuring out which characters were real and which characters might be
Yeah.
imagined.
Right.
So
I,
first of
I,
all, I guess what made you want to write a story about schizophrenia, and then maybe you could address that part as well.
well, I think the main reason was that I didn't want to write just a fantasy work where anything can happen. I wanted to write something basically realistic. So I had to set it to make the world exotic and beautiful. I just put it back in time. I put it back in the World War I era. And then to justify all the fantasy, I just made the characters have trouble coping with reality because I didn't want to just invent fantastical characters and scenarios that could never happen. I wanted everything that they fantasize about to be real and to be a reflection of the human mind and the kinds of things, the kinds of problems we all have when we're coming of age and dealing with the kinds of problems that young people face. I wanted it to be real. I wanted it to be realistic. So I thought that the best way would be to create point of view characters who are lost in fantasy and daydream and illusion and maybe even hallucination because they can't quite cope with reality as it is.
I've got to say, I was looking up symptoms of schizophrenia when I was preparing for this, and I started thinking, geez, maybe I should go see a psychologist. But so we do have growing mental health issues in the Western developed worlds, and plus, I think also in the Eastern developed world as well. I looked up the stats. I think it's 23% in the US. People currently believe or are diagnosed with mental health issues. In the UK, it's 25%. So what I'm wondering is there's been a clear increase and dramatic increase, especially since beginning of COVID. What do you think might be a reason for that?
Well, I'm not sure that I even really, I mean, I understand the stats that you cited, and I understand what you were saying about how easy it is for all of us to relate to a lot of these symptoms and things like that. But I think that everything is relative to the individual, and I don't necessarily believe in statistics. I mean, I know that in our society today, we have better healthcare and we are talking more openly about things like autism and schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease and all that kind of thing. But I don't necessarily believe in any of the sociological theories that which suggest that we're having more problems today than in the past. I think everything is relative to the individual, and I don't really personally. I just don't put my faith in theory or the social sciences. So I'm not trying to offend you or
No,
anything,
no.
but I just don't even necessarily believe the statistics.
Because what I'm wondering, I mean, obviously things like social media get blamed, and let's say we don't have as close of family groups anymore quite often, or neighborhood connections. Like my wife's Italian, and in Italy, especially while we lived in Tuscany, but also in southern Italy where she's from, you commonly have people open their windows in the morning and wave over to their neighbors, and
Yeah,
literally like you see in the movies sometimes where they're chatting across
right,
the street and stuff like that.
right.
So I think your character expressed a couple ideas that speak to me, which is a loss of connection. So they were floundering by themselves for most of the stories, right? They had a hard time making
Right.
connections with other people, in some cases being fearful of connection. And then a
Yeah.
sense of purpose, I think, as well. You touch on in relation to Anastasia. And so I'm wondering if those, because the way I look at it is those things seem to be challenged right now, and maybe the lack of purpose gets challenged in any successful society. As you reach a certain point, there's just nothing to accomplish, and you lose purpose. Does that sound like it might ring a bell? Be some kind of reasonable interpretation?
Yes, but what I'm saying is that all of those factors could be true of someone today or someone living in any era. I just don't think that we're all that different from the people in the past. We have a different level of technology. That's the main difference and the only difference. And so I'm wary of those who suggest that we are more fragile today than people in the past or something like that. It doesn't ring true to me. I just think that we have a different level of technology, but that's all. And our level of technology is so good, and the various avatars of the mass media are so good that we can really talk a lot about mental health issues today, which people couldn't do in the past. But that's not to say that we're going through anything new. So, I mean, I know that social media tends to keep people disconnected, but I think that people have been disconnected probably. I mean, you can always find disconnected or alienated people in any chapter of history.
So speaking on technology then, because something I was wondering, so we have, let's say, these disconnected, alienated people. And yes, they did exist all throughout history, perhaps more now. But again, we don't actually know, do we? Because it could also be that we're more aware of it now. So something that we have now is artificial intelligence that we can talk to. So I was curious because there's now some interesting stories coming out about this and people having relationships with the AI they're talking to. Do you think inherently that might be a net positive for the disconnected people or a net negative because it will keep them away from meaningful connections?
I think it's relative to the individual. I mean, there might be someone for whom AI is just all wrong. And then there might be somebody who's very strong and mentally helpful, and an AI companion is just the thing that he or she requires to have a better life and to fulfill his or her vocation. Everything is relative to the individual. And I think it's very hard to predict who will benefit from an AI companion and who will not. It's almost impossible to predict something like that. We would have to go on by a case by case basis and look at how AI or an AI companion affects any given individual. And for some, it will be a disaster. For some, it will be a spectacular success. And for some, it'll be somewhere in between. That's the feeling I get because
Right.
we're all so different,
Right.
particularly in terms of our unconscious.
Do you think, because we have a couple issues around this, one is, let's say, media presentation of the issue, which tends to focus on the most dramatic part of it. And then the fact that our research into something like this, like let's say we want to understand this better, by the time we do a meaningful research into it, the technology is already a light year ahead. We haven't
Right.
caught up yet anyway, have we?
Right. And it's probably always going to be that way because artificial intelligence will always be at least as complicated as the human brain is. And there's nothing more complicated in the universe than the human brain. So we're always going to be working on artificial intelligence and augmenting it more and more. We're never going to be quite on top of it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, that does seem to be true. Until it takes over, maybe we'll see.
I'm skeptical of that type of thing. I mean, that's the kind of trope or idea we hear a lot in science fiction, but it just seems a little bit too melodramatic for me. I'm not that cynical or afraid. I think society will always be able to police any and all abuses of artificial intelligence. I believe that I have a pretty positive faith in both God and society and the United States government. I'm a square in that regard. I'm just a total square in that regard. I just don't think that we're going to see some great calamity where artificial intelligence takes over. It seems a bit much for me.
Right. Well, let's hope it stays at the level of a tool for sure.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we are moving towards the end of our time, but I wanted to leave with one big question. And so these times, at least from my perspective, they seem to be at least mimicking an end of something. Whatever that something is, we don't know. But an end can mean rebirth as well. This isn't the end. This is simply possibly an end to perhaps something more. And so, what I'm going to ask you is if we stay hopeful for the future, what would you hope that we, let's say, human society, humanity might be reborn into if this is a time of change and rebirth?
Well, I think that it's not a time of change and rebirth because I think that we have probably still 250 years before the age of petroleum will end. I mean, we have 250 years worth of crude oil left in the earth. And I don't see the world economy changing that much. I don't see humankind and society changing all that much as long as the OPEC oil cartel is basically running the world economy as it more or less is. But I think that it can't last forever. It will end in a few hundred years. At that time, there will be a great opportunity for Western countries to reassert themselves and to promulgate the alternative form of energy that will be needed at that time. Hopefully, it will be something like solar energy or something like that. And if so, we will all have the ability to address a lot of our existential issues and we'll be able to look closely at man's ecological footprint and clean up the planet. And that will be a great thing. If we survive the age of petroleum and all the craziness in the Middle East, we'll have a chance to really clean up the planet and make a better world for our children. And that to me is hopeful. But we're not quite there yet, I would say.
Do you think there's something that you would like to see humanity perhaps internally evolve into, let's say with in regards to our approach to life, to nature, to each other, things like that, or even to the spiritual and divine realms?
I think well, that's a very difficult question. I don't think that we are necessarily going to evolve into something extraordinary. I mean, we are neither apes nor angels. We are humans, and we're always going to be humans. We're always going to be fraught with all of our foibles, and we're never going to be angels. We're never going to be something especially great or perfect. We're always going to be painfully imperfect. But the level of technology will always change. And that's about it. I don't mean to sound cynical when I say that I'm trying to be more just down to earth. But I am also, in the interest of full disclosure, I am a member of the Catholic Church. So I see us as children of Adam and Eve, and I see us as being basically not much different than we were in the past. And again, I see us as a life form that can never be as perfect as the angels or something like that. We're always going to be painfully imperfect. We're never going to evolve into something really great or wonderful.
Right. I guess I was going to bring up the church as you were saying that as well, because I suppose the church perspective is that this journey of this life then leads into the next life, which is a whole different thing, isn't it?
Right. And for me, I'm content with letting it just be a mystery. I don't want to pontificate too much on something like that, like the hereafter. But I do think that if there is no hereafter, there will still be a kind of hereafter in terms of just the universe replenishing itself. And I do think that if the Catholic faith turns out to be wrong about the hereafter, there will be some alternative, perhaps eternal recurrence, that the idea that the universe ignites in the Big Bang, it exists for billions of years, then it dies out, and then everything comes back to every aspect of the universe comes back to the way it was in that period in which the forces ignited to create the Big Bang, and then we have another Big Bang, and then we go through the whole process again. I do believe, I mean, I'm optimistic in that regard. If the Catholic faith fails, I think life will never come to an end. We will eternally recur in one form or another. And so, in that sense, I'm hopeful. I know that in every iteration of the universe, there will be artists, writers, engineers, people who discover great things. But as a race, the human race will never be something perfect or truly great. It will always be painfully imperfect. That's the phrase I would use. But I'm not trying to sound cynical when I say that. I'm just more just trying to sound realistic.
Fair enough. Well, on that existential note for conclusion, it's been great chatting with you, but we are out of time today. I just wondered, before you go, perhaps you can let us know if you have any upcoming books other than the current one, or if you're working on anything else, and where we might find you online, and if you'll be in any upcoming events.
In November, the little Australian hybrid, they'll be publishing the sequel to Anastasia's Midnight Song. And you can find me on mlaszlo.com. That's my author website. It's a humble little website, but you can get all the links to my Instagram page there. And there's a lot of fun stuff on the Instagram page, I think.
And are you going to any upcoming events or anything?
Well, I'm currently doing an online book review tour that'll go on for probably most of the summer. When that one's done, I'll probably try to get advanced reader copies of the sequel to reviewers and try to get more online review tours started, either through the internet or through my Instagram page. And I'll eventually get a new trailer put together and put that on the website. So, I will be out there in one form or another.
Excellent. Laszlo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Edwin. It was a great pleasure.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.